Right, kia ora, everyone. I think we'll get started then. Thank you so much for joining us for the second of our webinar series, My Story. It is my great pleasure to welcome Rosalind to join us. Before I introduce Rosalind, I would like to say also a huge thank you to Plant and Food, who have been our sponsor for this series, and without them we would not have a series. So thank you very much, Plant and Food. Rosalind did her PhD, I believe, at Stanford University in petroleum engineering, although I believe that she moved to geothermal engineering is more your passion now, I believe. She moved very briefly to Texas A&M University before coming to University of Auckland in 2002. In 2013, she both became a full professor and also became the head of the engineering science department in the Faculty of Engineering. And she held the Mercury Mighty River Power Chair in Geothermal Reservoir Engineering from 2013 to 2018. She's had a number of awards and etc. So she won the Society of Petroleum Engineers, Regional Distinguished Achievement Award for Petroleum Engineering Faculty in 2011, and was the first New Zealand-based engineer to be awarded the position of Distinguished Member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers in 2015. In 2016, she won the Deloitte Energy Engineer of the Year Award. She's a Fellow of Engineering New Zealand and was elected Deputy President of that organisation in 2020. In March 2021, she was elected President of Engineering New Zealand, and in December 2021, unfortunately for us, but luckily for Rosalind, she took up a new role as the Head of School of Engineering and Built Environment at Griffith University in Queensland. But I believe earlier this year, she stepped down from that role and took up the challenge of becoming Dean Academic in Griffith Sciences Group. Welcome, Rosalind, and thank you very much for being with us today. Actually, I should just say to people, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, there will be a chance to ask questions in the chat. So if you do think of questions as Rosalind is talking, then please shove them in the chat and we will address them as we get to at the end. Thank you, Rosalind. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for that generous introduction. It really is a pleasure to be online with you today from my new home in Queensland in Australia, based at Griffith University. So I would like to begin with a traditional acknowledgement of country, which I will offer in Te Reo Māori. E mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nehe o Yugambeh e noho nei au, ko tēnei taku mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o te rohui nei. Ka mihi hoki au ki ngā tohu e te rohui nei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So that acknowledgement of country acknowledges the Yugambeh as the traditional owners of the land where I'm coming from, on the Gold Coast in Australia. It acknowledges ancestors, Indigenous peoples, the land and the landmarks of the places where we're coming from. So I would also like to acknowledge Jill Jolly as the first speaker in this series. It is really a pleasure to follow on from her. I enjoyed watching the recording of that session. So if you haven't caught that one, do catch that one online. So in the spirit of thinking about a journey and where people have come from, I have a few slides, a few images on this slide that relate to offerings that would traditionally be part of a pepeha in Māori. So in terms of a mountain, which I identify with, I have a shot there of beautiful Mount Taranaki. So I grew up largely in New Plymouth in Taranaki. That has have a follow-on effect about getting involved in the oil industry. The waterway in the bottom is the Tihinui that flows past my parents' home in New Plymouth, and it's always a pleasure to go back there. So I left Taranaki to move to Auckland to study. So the big building in the top is 70 Simon Street, which was my second home when I was at the University of Auckland, now known as Bioengineering House, but home of the Engineering Science Department. And most recently, when I was living in Auckland, I had the privilege to live out west. I am a true Westie, but I was living on a wonderful piece of land out towards Bethel's Beach, a piece of land that is significant for the local Maori community. It's on the top of a hill, and it was a trading point for punamu being traded up and down the Green Coast. So it's a really special place. But now I find myself on the Gold Coast. The shot in the bottom right is a photo I took from one of the Gold Coast high-rises just a few weeks ago after a function. So in terms of education, Nick has covered the highlights, but yes, I grew up in Taranaki, went to an all-girls school, New Plymouth Girls High. From there, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Auckland in engineering. Never really knew about engineering, really only discovered it kind of by accident. I was good at maths, and for some reason I thought that meant I had to turn out to be an accountant because they worked with numbers. I'm the first in my immediate family to go to university. So it was really a chance interaction that got me a place on a science summer school at the University of Auckland, run by the Faculty of Science, where one of the speakers mentioned the engineering science degree, and that really turned a corner. So in many ways, I owe that speaker a great deal. So I did a bachelor's in engineering science, had a great time doing it, had a wonderful class. Our class had an abnormally high percentage of females. So within engineering science, my year was 25% female. So we had some, I wouldn't say gender balance, but more gender balance than was normal for the time. And as part of the engineering degree, you have to do work experience hours. So I did that work experience in the oil and gas industry back in Taranaki, the image on the top right. So I come to the end of my degree. What am I going to do? I weighed up lots of different options, but in the end, I decided that the science and the tech of the oil and gas industry is downright fascinating. It is an incredibly interesting challenge to think about how you cleanly, safely, economically extract those resources from underground. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle with a bunch of pieces you can't see because the puzzle is playing out several kilometres below your feet, below the land or below the ocean. I've actually been out to the platform as a student, so have been and seen, you know, what life is like on an oil rig, and have full respect for the workers who deliver those resources. So yeah, after my bachelor's degree, I found a way to get to Stanford University, who at that time had a program dedicated and branded as petroleum engineering. Modern programs typically are rebranding into energy programs for reasons that are easy to imagine, but at that stage it was a petroleum engineering program. So Stanford is in the bottom left of the screen. That picture postcard view really is, you know, aside from needing a few more students on bicycles, I don't know how they tidied that up, Stanford really does look like that. If you ever get the chance to go there, even as a tourist, just go on the campus tour. It is an amazing place, an incredibly alive place. So I did a master's and a PhD at Stanford. And then what next? I decided, even though I'd done internships in a range of companies, from software startups to large-scale companies, every summer of my graduate work, and I'd done those around the world, I decided I didn't want to go the corporate route. So I was recruited onto tenure track to Texas A&M University. So the students with Howdy across their T-shirts is a shot from Texas A&M. Spent 2.5 years there, still have fond memories and friendships from my time in Texas, but ultimately it was not where I wanted to, quote, settle down. So the phone had rung one day with a call from the University of Auckland saying, we're advertising a role, we think you should apply. So we know how that story ends. So I found my way back to New Zealand in 2002. And then, as Nick mentioned in the introduction, I slipped out of New Zealand in the tail end of COVID, leaving, you know, while the university was still essentially shut down with lockdown. very surreal time to go. Left on Boxing Day in 2021 to take up a new challenge. So Nick's talked about some of those milestones, but I might just put a gender lens on them. So I became a department head in 2013 of the Department of Engineering Science. I was the first woman to become a department head of any engineering program at Auckland, and I did so while actually still an associate professor. So there's a fork in the road there. Do you, as an associate professor, do you sit and you eyeball what's it going to take to become a professor? Or sometimes when a service opportunity calls, do you rebalance how you're spending your time? I became a department head on extremely short notice. Going into Christmas, I had already gone on holiday. The Dean's executive assistant was tasked with finding me while I was on holiday to make me the offer of becoming department head on 2 weeks notice to start on the 4th of January. So needless to say, that Christmas holiday felt a little different than usual. But in the end, it was something that I decided to approach with intent, really decided to tackle it head on, to start as I meant to continue. It was a role that had all sorts of fascinating layers to it. I was still pretty young at that point. I was an associate professor. I was managing people who had taught me and known me since I was 18. So many of those staff were still with us and still contributing, still wonderful academics. But yeah, and they were great about it. So no issue there. But you can see the challenge. Later on in 2013, I was fortunate enough to be awarded the professorial chair, funded by what was Mighty River Power, what's now Mercury, and that came with it to be also simultaneously the director of the Geothermal Institute at the University of Auckland. The institute had been in a hiatus for a while. It was formerly a globally recognised entity for teaching, research, consulting in geothermal, and I was tasked with rebuilding it after a hiatus, and really valued the support that Mercury offered in that way. What else happens? I became, by winning the Mercury chair, I then became a professor in late 2013 as well. And then the corporate governance world started to call. So again, another phone call out of the blue saying, have you ever thought of becoming a company director? And I think, to be honest, the answer was no. I had not thought of becoming a company director. But New Zealand Oil and Gas were looking for an independent director. I'm known for being fairly independent in the way I think. At that stage, they would have seen me in the media making freelance comment on various issues associated with the industry. They wanted someone with discipline knowledge. Often boards are stacked with lawyers and accountants, but it is important to have people on your board that understand your core business. So I actually spent a year with them as kind of a board understudy. You sort of get treated as a consultant, sitting in on all board meetings without legal responsibility, and then formally became a company director in 2014. So for scale, the company has a market capitalization of on the order of $100 million. And I'm the first woman to join that board. And I'm really conscious that that board has a governance responsibility that embraces a whole range of stakeholders, from what we might describe as mum and dad investors, you or your parents investing small amounts of funds, which is easy to do these days through platforms, online platforms, where you are setting aside a small nest egg for your future, through to corporate investors. So it is a complex and fascinating landscape, but it's experience I really value, and I'm still a director with them today. And then, as Nick mentioned, in 21, I became president of Te Ao Rangahau Engineering New Zealand, after spending time on their board as vice president and deputy president, using governance skills in a different kind of a way, in a non-profit organisation, serving a membership of over 20,000 people, an organisation that had, at that stage, only 2 other women had ever become president. Gender is looking good for that organisation. They've just had another woman become president, Jan Evans-Freeman, who was Dean of Engineering at Canterbury, and she will now serve for a 2-year term. I only served a 1-year term because of the Constitution, but some of the constitutional reforms I kicked off mean that presidents now serve for 2 years. So it's quite exciting. She will be president for 2 years running. So my career has been one that's been global. So this map I've coloured in orange. I think I forgot to colour in Vietnam, which was my most recent trip. But the countries in orange are places I've been, and largely, some of them are holidays, but largely work-related activities. So especially some of the more unusual ones. A fascinating trip to Africa doing work for New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Speaking engagements in Iran and Azerbaijan, consulting activity in Algeria twice. Not that I've actually seen much of Algeria, because security concerns mean when I go to Algeria, I'm grounded to the Algiers Hilton for a week at a time. And the engineers that I'm training, they come to me and we work in a function room in the hotel, and I never leave the hotel just because of the security requirements involved. Very strange way to live. But the mathematics that I work on in the energy industry has really literally been a ticket to the world, which I'm incredibly grateful for. So my current role, I came to Griffith as Head of School of Engineering and Built Environment, leading a school that goes from engineering to aviation, architecture, urban planning, construction management, and industrial design. Haven't forgotten anybody. But in a bit of a reshuffle of what we call the Sciences Group at Griffith, earlier this year, I became Dean Academic. So I now the heads of 3 schools report to me, and I have some overarching portfolio responsibilities on the slides. So that gives me responsibility for about 450 academic staff, essentially as a deputy to the Pro-Vice Chancellor for our portion of the university. So I've been doing that for all of about 2 months and having a good time doing that so far. But I thought I might just reflect on the journey, because when it's laid out like that, it's like, oh, it sounds easy. There's not been any challenges. But I would be lying if I said there were never challenging moments. So I grabbed one little example that admittedly is from last century. I'm old enough to know what last century looks like, where I was invited to a meeting as a student in a nameless New Zealand energy company, so in an intern situation, and told to wear a short skirt to the meeting because we needed something out of the director of another division, and somehow my manager thought wearing a short skirt would make that happen. Needless to say, I turned up in an ankle-length skirt. And anyway, the meeting gets cancelled. The manager we were meeting in the IT portion of the company, he was sick. He had man flu. But it was one of those sort of open plan offices. So I now had time on my hands. There was no meeting. So I did sneak in there and borrow a programming manual. So I learned SQL. It didn't take me a day. I confess it took 2 days, and started doing the work that we were going off to ask IT to do. And my manager was stunned. It's like, how did you generate these reports? Because so-and-so is on sick leave all week. And it's like, the power of IT, not the power of wearing a short skirt. So there have inevitably been things like that happen along the way. I think the landscape of the workplace has changed these days, that things like that are outright sexist. Obviously, managers and workplaces are taking a much tougher line on them, but there is still, in some workplaces, acts of sort of everyday sort of sexism that we still need to work on. And also, as I reflect on sort of the journey I've been on, I do want to really acknowledge people that have made it possible. So this kind of academic family tree portrait is a wonderful shot where the guy on the right is Professor Mike O'Sullivan, who is still at the University of Auckland. His wife, Margie. In the middle, my PhD supervisor, Professor Roland Horn, in the blue shirt. He's a Kiwi. So Roland was Mike's first PhD student. Sitting next to Roland in the yellow shirt is my husband, Colin, my long-suffering husband, Colin, and then me, and then tacked on, pasted in is John O'Sullivan, who was one of my PhD students and who was Mike's son. But why I tell this story is just to acknowledge how important Mike was, because when I finished my undergraduate degree and decided I wanted to study petroleum engineering, which you couldn't do in New Zealand, so I had to go overseas, I had a crisis of confidence. I was like, well, that's preposterous. I need a massive scholarship to a university in the Northern Hemisphere. I live in a small country on the other side of the world. How can this possibly happen? So for a while there, I just thought that was daft. So I started quietly applying for regular jobs, just thinking I'd go to work after my bachelor's. And I walked into Mike's office with two letters from two different companies who wanted to offer me jobs, and said to Mike, which should I choose? And he almost ripped them out of my hands by sort of saying, well, neither. You need to be doing a PhD. And contacted Roland and sort of got me back going down that pathway. But this could have been a different story otherwise. So in terms of sort of lessons learned and tips from that pathway, one thing I have learned is it's actually okay to wear a skirt. In my time at Texas A&M University, I went through a phase of really trying to fit in, trying to blend in down to my physical appearance. So I would turn up at work wearing outfits like the one in the middle, which, give or take a little, bit of shape in the fit, is blending in a very male environment. And I deliberately changed the way I approached the world, changed my attire later in life when I decided, look, no, I'm going to turn up to work being me. So I kind of like the Oscar Wilde quote on the left saying, be yourself, everyone else is taken. So yeah, I wear a skirt when I want to and not when I don't. In terms of some tips, I came up with 5 that I just wanted to run through. First of all, people sometimes come up to me and say, oh, I'm really fascinated by sort of management, leadership, governance, whatever it may be, but I'm a real introvert, and it's scary, and I would have to be working with people all day. And I assure those people, introverts make great leaders. I am a devout introvert in my home life. In my work life, I'm typically in meetings and interacting with people around the clock, whether that's 9 to 5 or whether that's 8 till 8. But if you're an introvert, then you know how to listen, you know how to be quiet, and the more quieter you are, the more you can hear. So introversion and leadership are not attributes that are diametrically opposed. I really do see it as a superpower. If you're an introvert, do read, if you haven't seen it before, Susan Cain's book, Quiet. Now, this shot is me. And this shot is a reminder to back yourself to take reasonable risks. So there's a line between brave and crazy, and we've all got to know where it is. So I decided, one year my challenge to myself was that I would go and start to learn the basics of some circus arts, in particular aerial silks. And that's sort of quite a landmark in silks once you figure out how to climb up and turn yourself upside down and not land on your head. And you don't do that if you're not prepared to back yourself and really just go after something you've decided you want to do. I also have had a lifelong love of dance, contemporary sort of dance styles. So there's a couple of shots. I'm in the sort of red, orange singlet in both. Seems to be a trend. But that advice would be to find people who lift you up and make sure you do that for others. So no matter where you are in your own journey, there is someone that you can lift up and bring along with you, and never forget to do that part, because it pays it forward to the people who really picked you up when you needed it. I was tempted to ask for a bit of audience participation on this one. Does anyone want to type in chat what they think their image is? Just make sure I can see the chat. Just a second. Any suggestions on what that might be? Sorry, let me bring it back. Chat window. Webs. Yeah. So I'm my science life, I'm known as I describe myself as an energy engineer. I'm interested in fluid flow, which does imply sort of a network of permeability, whether that's through an oil and gas reservoir, through a geothermal reservoir. That image is the kind of thing a student in bioengineering was talking about in a project. And I arrived late to their presentation, and I'm looking at this and thinking, it does look kind of like some of the geological problems I'm working on in terms of recreating an understanding of what's going on underground. Turns out that's an image of a network of cells called the interstitial cells of Cajal, which are in your gut and manage electrical signaling through your gut. And I gather having a gut biopsy is not fun. Haven't tried it, don't want to. But if they do a biopsy, they only biopsy a small patch. And if you try to understand the mechanism of signaling in your gut, you really want to understand how this network of cells connects across your gut. Do you get kind of pathways that connect well or pathways that don't? And that is in many ways quite relevant to some of the things that I think about in terms of getting oil and gas or geothermal fluids out from underground. So I mentioned to the student and his supervisor that, hey, I've got some ideas that could jump over the boundary on this. And we ended up testing some stuff out, working with clinicians, and I ended up joining a collaboration with the Mayo Clinic. So I'm probably the only reservoir engineer that collaborates with the Mayo Clinic in the United States, because we'd had some fun. We'd had some fun going outside the sort of silo and bounds of my discipline as a petroleum engineering, taken the underlying science into a completely different domain and found some stuff that's really quite useful and fascinating. My final tip is keep finding your next challenge. And that doesn't have to be the next promotion, the bigger, better job, whatever better might mean to you. But do keep finding things that challenge you and excite you, that keeps you alive. I'm not a natural born runner. It is not really my favorite thing to do. But, there's a shot on screen again with me in a red singlet of me deciding I really should take up the challenge of running over the Harbour Bridge. When you live in Auckland, it's kind of something you should do once. And I think it is important to, just keep finding that challenge. And then with a challenge like that, I only did the 12K version, not the full marathon. But to run 12K, you have to then break that down. It's like, okay, well, I'm sitting on the couch right now. I can't run 12K today. What can I do about that today? I could go for a walk. I could jog 2K. I could run 3K. I could do a 5K event in a month's time. And, break that challenge into little pieces. And that, makes those challenges come to life. And then my final couple of slides are just to note some interests I've always had in equity, diversity and inclusion. So back last century, when I was with the University of Auckland as a student, I co-founded the Women in Engineering Network with a friend. And this is the most recent photo I could find of the network's leadership team. It's a network that thrives, is run really professionally, attracts incredible corporate sponsorship. But it started because, someone, a friend and I, with support from a staff member, saw a need, saw a way to step in and make change. We're in a very different environment. When I think on how we started that network, we're thinking definitely life before the internet. So we would advertise by, old school printing flyers and sticking them up around the faculty. Often our flyers would get torn down. The guys would tear down our flyers. The only place they were safe was the women's bathroom. So we've now gone from that to, a place where this network are out there, extremely embedded in the faculty there, as part of the faculty offering on open day. And actually now this network have been quite influential over the years in mentoring and supporting other student networks. the South Pacific Island Student Network, the Rainbow Student Network in the faculty as well. And then the other thing that I noted in my advertising is that Griffith University do take a really serious approach to allyship for the LGBTQI+ community. I have always had wonderful friends who have been part of that community, and I make my stance as an ally visible, because I've been led to believe that is really important and meaningful. So I have offices both in Brisbane and on the Gold Coast, and both my offices have these ally placards. This is my old office that when I went on holiday, someone did add the tagline of Jedi Master keeping the Sith Lords at bay. I take that as a compliment. And then the one with the rainbow socks is a very public post I made on Idea Hobbit Day, just making a public stand against homophobia in any organisation I'm connected to. So, I do want everybody to be able to show up, to be seen as who they am. So I have a quote from the Greatest Showman on there along those lines. So look, everyone, thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about the journey I've been on. Super happy to take questions or comments, and if you're watching the recording or you have to race away, I am easy to find, email, LinkedIn, etc. So thank you.
There's one thing I dislike about webinars. You can't hear the clapping of everybody. I'm sure they're sitting in their offices or sitting at home clapping. Rosalind, thank you so much for that. I really love that quote from The Greatest Showman. It's one of my favorite songs because of the message behind it. A fantastic anthem, I think, for many people. Does anybody have any comments or any questions for Rosalind? If you just pop them in the chat.
Yeah, I've got the chat window open.
Just while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I hadn't realised that you were behind WEN. I know it's such a fantastic network, and we occasionally network. In fact, I think that one of the people who's working on it now is online.
Hi Kelly, thank you for everything you do for WEN.
And Ashley as well has been involved. And it's going from strength to strength. Awesome things happen. It's fantastic. Right. It's
okay if people are feeling shy.
Interesting
question from Ashley.
I'm going to read it out if that's okay, just so it's, because I'm not sure if it'll come up through on the recording. How do you think Australia's efforts to improve diversity in STEM compare with New Zealand's?
If I'm honest, I think Australia probably has a bit to learn in some sectors. I think New Zealand, for instance, Te Ao Rangahau, Engineering New Zealand, with the diversity agenda, that's been a part of the landscape of Engineering New Zealand's very well organised, committed offering for many years. Whereas I think Engineering Australia are still perhaps struggling to put that same level of coordination and focus behind it. There are, obviously companies, universities, organisations doing stuff at organisational level, but I think the scene in Australia is perhaps a bit more fractured. So New Zealand being a small country, we can all collaborate quite easily, and Engineering New Zealand, for example, can pull off things like the Rocket Challenge and link up with 800 schools, as opposed to Australia, where you might have many initiatives, and maybe some schools getting a lot of overlap and some schools missing it. So yeah. But Griffith University, where I am, do have very genuine commitments to diversity and inclusion, very values-based. So that was one of the things that I weighed up when I made the move.
Awesome. And I have no doubt that you will help sort out the other things that need work over there, Rosalind.
I do have to chair, I chair equity committee for our portion of the university. So that's my job for the afternoon.
Excellent. Okay, next question. How strategic were you in plotting your career path, And if it wasn't highly planned, what was your process to making the move away from and back to academia?
In terms of that movement, I would always say I'm an academic. I just perhaps don't look like all academics in that all through my time at the University of Auckland, I was doing a lot with industry. I had a phase where I think for a full year I was on secondment. So I did a day or two a week actually working for a New Zealand energy company, and the rest of the week in the university. But even in my current leadership role, even though I have 480 or so academics in my management line, I have insisted that I still teach. So I am giving, I have 12 hours of teaching in second year calculus for what would be the maths department in New Zealand. I still publish, I still work with students. It's more a matter of the mix that, those things, I don't do as much of those things to make room for the leadership role. How strategic was I? Yeah, if you had asked me 20 years ago, is this where I would end up? No, I wouldn't have seen, predicted this at that scale. But probably on a kind of a 5-year horizon, I do make a point of thinking, well, what am I doing right now? Is this what I want to be doing in the next 5 years? And if it's not, how do we change the path?
It sounds like you had some good people backing you along the way, which helped.
I did.
And
Great
that
question.
idea of lifting people up, it's just so important, isn't it? It helps. It really helps. Any further questions? Thanks for the insight.
No problem.
No, I just want to say thank you very much, Rosalind, because I know I've known you. I mean, I've probably known you longer than you've known me, as in because I've known who you are.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
although I was never in your faculty, I was in science, still seeing a woman in a leadership role really, really made a difference.
Oh,
See that it could be done. And I know that it's less of a thing now. We are seeing more women in leadership roles, but certainly when I was younger, that it definitely made a difference seeing people in those roles. So thank you for not only for today, but for your what's the word, being a good role model without even realizing it.
Oh, look, thank you for that. But I'm quite open that I'm happily married to a wonderful husband who is also a scientist. Don't have kids, and my life has actually become somewhat easier because my husband decided through Auckland's voluntary redundancy scheme that he is no longer with the university. So I have a stay-at-home husband who is a fantastic cook, is very well house trained. So there's stuff behind the scenes that also does make it quite easy.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I like to say that I've heard people say, "Oh, but you're so lucky to have a partner like that." And don't get me wrong, I mean, absolutely 100%. We need partners who are going to support us, etc. But I'd like to think it's not just luck that we chose people who were there for us and treated us as equals. So yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay. Any last questions before we say goodbye to Rosalind? No? Thank you so much and enjoy your equity meeting this afternoon.
Indeed. Thank you all for joining. I do know some of you, so lovely to see some familiar names, and anyone I don't know is also super welcome. So thanks all.
And so, yes, one final thank you to Plant and Food for sponsoring and Association for Women in the Sciences for putting it on. So thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.
Bye.